Welcome to Cyber Insecurity, brought to you by eLearn Security. I'm Matt Kreischer, content specialist at eLearn Security, and as always, I'm joined by Neil Bridges and Jeff Goals. Neil is a cybersecurity veteran. He started at Cyber Command at the U.S. Air Force and has since worked with both Fortune 100 companies and PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's currently consulting through his company Root Access, and Jeff is a named account manager with VMware Carbon Black. He has more than 30 years experience in the technology and cybersecurity sectors, helping clients around the world achieve first-class security protocols. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you as always.
So in today's show, we're going to talk about specific TTPs and how they rise and fall, along with a couple interesting things on the nation state front. First, I want to talk about Emotet. After a 5-month hiatus, the Emotet botnet came back with, what you could call a vengeance on Friday, July 17th. There were about 250,000 messages sent from the botnet that day, mostly to the US and the UK, although the messages were sent around the world. According to Ars Technica, Emotet is the world's costliest botnet. So I'm a little curious, A, why did it go away? And B, why do you think it's returned now?
Emotet's a nasty. Emotet is definitely the influenza of the malware, the banking Trojans that are out there. It's pretty nasty. I know I've spent countless months, years with one of my previous incident response teams, literally chasing Emotet in our environment. It truly is like the influenza of banking Trojans that are out there. I think what you're seeing is there was a massive campaign, I think a number of months ago, that really dismantled a lot of Emotet, and people had figured out a lot of their DGA or their domain generation algorithms and really shut them down. And so I think that what you're seeing here is you're seeing a resurgence of, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and look at our TTPs and look at our tactics, techniques, and procedures, and really decide on, how we're going to come back and utilize, some of the things that the blue team has learned about how it is that we operate.
I almost envision a bunch of red team engineers sitting out there saying, they figured out how we got in last time. Let's redraw this up. They're sitting on a whiteboard and trying to figure out, I bet they're doing this and I bet they're doing that. I just think that it never went anywhere. It just wasn't as effective, and so it stopped being utilized as heavily as it was. And now they figured out
I think to that point,
attack.
though, right? I think what people fail to realize is just how organized these organized crime folks are who are doing cybercrime. They have, I hate to go all military on everybody here, right? But they've got strategic vision seekers inside their organization who are saying, our strategic vision is to steal billions and billions of dollars as overly complicated as that seems.
Do they publish their mission statements?
Do they have strategy to task plan?
Exactly. They got a VP of marketing. We got to do better job, guys. Come on.
Numbers up.
Well, to even make it less military and more private industry, these really are, we're going to talk about REvil a little bit later in the show, but these really are ransomware as service. I mean, these are criminal organizations with corporate structures almost.
Yeah, they're business models. They have strategic visions. They have operational objectives. They had tactical executioners. And so, Jeff's, God, this is going to get recorded. Jeff is a little bit right. That's as much as I can really say it. They went back to the drawing board and they were like, how do we fix this?
You warned me that you were going to be feisty today. I was not expecting the left hook of a compliment. But you look at this though. They sent out 250,000 messages. This is even from a botnet perspective, that's a pretty hefty number of messages that was sent out. And then just the sheer propagation of how they were using this, I found pretty interesting. I kind of get the sense that they were looking for unpatched or poorly patched machines and just kind of taking a wide breath of, what machine should we attack, and kind of shooting at a very large quantity so that they could then focus in on a few of the smaller, less patched environments. further down in the article, I found it pretty interesting. They kept on talking a little bit about which ones were attacked, and the ones that they just kind of glossed over were the ones that had 2FA and any kind of authentication that made it a little bit more difficult. So it was literally a low watermark kind of attack. That just, hey, whatever's easiest, let's go after that, and then either not worry about the more difficult ones, or we'll deal with those later.
This quarter even has been the quarter of vulnerabilities. I mean, between SIGRED, between the F5 vulnerability, between the SAP vulnerability. I just got a notice again today for some more Cisco vulnerabilities that are out there that are starting to become weaponized. This has definitely become the quarter of vulnerabilities. And so it would not surprise me if their resurgence is also tied towards, okay, let's start to capitalize on some of these beat the patch type tactics where they try to get malware out the door quicker than organizations are able to patch. And I think we talked about this like a couple podcasts ago, right? Is just how long it takes an organization to patch. And so these beat the patch techniques really make them very successful. And this is how they get to be successful inside of organizations. And then they've got some traditional malware that they drop, kind of as secondary and tertiary to that in TrickBot, which is also another, very, very, insidious piece of malware. And then Matt, to your point, could potentially, I think we talked about this. If we didn't talk about this, then I think it's something we brought up in conversation when we were prepping for this podcast, right? Is that, a lot of these malware, cyber criminal organizations are starting to create cartels, very much in the sense of where you've got multiple cyber, criminal gangs working together to try to be successful. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see, the success of Emotet get paired with, maybe the success or the insidiousness of REvil or Maze on top of that to try to really, really do damage to some organizations.
So, question, this is a little bit more off the wall, but do you see that some of these attacking groups are saying, hey, we're trying to get this organization or this country's eye off the ball of what I'm trying to do, start hitting these vulnerabilities over here, and they'll not have as many resources trying to view my much more valuable
I
kind
don't
of an
think
attack.
We've actually seen anything formalized from a cyber criminal perspective. That's very much a state-sponsored TTP, and I'll give you a real-world example. When I was first coming out of the Air Force in 2013, when banking, was more of a focus than it is now. Not that it's really lost a lot of its muster, but it was huge back then. We actually saw. I was working for a financial organization at the time, and we actually saw Iranian DDoS attacks being used in the financial sector as a way to distract from SQL injection and cross-site scripting attempts happening on some of our other partner websites in the network. And so I don't think we've got too many documentations where we see cyber criminals doing that type of activity, on a large scale like that. But I think if we were to see the advent of more and more cartels, absolutely. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility at all.
So let me ask you this. Who's going to win this round between Emotet and the blue teams? Do you see Emotet is this a one-off thing, or do you see them growing stronger and, as Jeff mentioned, going after the big fish next now that they've re-announced their debut?
So it's funny you asked that, because I was literally just having a LinkedIn conversation with somebody who was commenting on, a previous podcast, right, and asking why we keep seeing breaches. And I think that the cynical side and probably the slightly more pragmatic and realistic side is the blue team's never going to win. Right, you just need to accept that, right? Jeff's over there laughing.
You are such a negative Nelly.
They'll never
win.
You're never going to win. The hacker has to get it right once. And the way that I phrased it for this individual over on LinkedIn was the blue team is just one component of it. A company, pick any company, pick Apple, Target, Home Depot, whatever it is, they have to get it right on a technology side. They have to get it right on the people side. They have to get it right on a process side. They have to get it right on a political side. They've got to get everything to line up perfectly 100% of the time to stop an attack that only has to be successful in one of those avenues.
I also want to say that while it may be true that blue teams never win, if we put it in a win-loss metaphor, that doesn't excuse companies from not having a blue team. I mean,
no.
Companies that weren't prepared for Emotet were probably the ones that didn't have a blue team, that weren't focused on these kind of attacks because, you're never going to stop everything and new attacks will happen that you've never thought of. But a strong blue team and a huge and like a holistic cybersecurity environment is essential right now.
It is. It's risk. Sorry, Jeff, real quick. It's risk mitigation, right? The blue team helps you mitigate. I mean, you can stop 90% of it, right? But you're going to get hit with something at some point in time. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
I was just going to say we saw this exact thing in this last article. The fact of the matter is the attackers just kind of glossed over those that had two-factor authentication and said, "Oh, that's going to take too much time and effort. We're just going to keep going to the low-hanging fruit." So, I mean, to some extent, you don't have to outrun the bear; you have to outrun the other camper, right? Not to bring this to a really demoralizing subject here, but if the attacker is going after two of you, and he can only attack one of you at a time, and you are a smidge more difficult to attack, they're going to go to the easier person.
I mean, while you're not wrong, that's a terrible, terrible precedent for CIOs and CISOs who are listening to this call right now, because when you roll it in the concept of some of the Ponzi schemes or the pyramid schemes or the multi-level marketing schemes that some of the big fours put you under, right? And I say that with all due respect to my friends at PwC and Deloitte and NY.
Yeah, tons of respect. I could sense the respect.
You don't want to chase like a maturity rating of 3.2 simply because everybody else in your industry, the best they could achieve is a 2.7, right? Because that's just like that's that bare minimum.
Like, hey, we win. we lost less than you.
We're not doing as bad as our competitors, so see, we're fine. Here's the thing.
Well, isn't that a little bit of the conversation that CIOs and CISOs are having with their boards?
But here's the thing: like when you get sued, you're not going to stand in front of that judge and be like, "Well, why did you let the bad guys into your network and steal all this personal information?" Because we weren't as bad as those guys. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
Exactly. I don't disagree, but there is also a reality check to this, and I think. It's at least a good starting point. And Matt, to your point, it doesn't excuse not having something in place. You need to have those things in place, not just as a deterrent, but eventually you are going to be on the hit list, and you have to have a protocol and people and the right SOC team and the right tools set in place with the right procedure to deal with.
That is to deal with like the Emotets, because if we go back to the analogy, right, the Emotet is the influenza of the internet, right? Along with, like TrickBot and Ryuk and even Maze and REvil, right, are all variations of that same strain of influenza. Your things that you're building inside your companies, they're your vaccines for. Hopefully there's no anti-vaxxers on the podcast listening. Those are your vaccines for kind of helping you protect against, a lot of that malware.
So moving on, because we've mentioned a couple things already that we're going to talk about later in the show. One of the things that was lost in the madness, that's been lost in the madness of the coronavirus pandemic, is the rise in DDoS attacks in the first half of 2020. This could be because most of the attacks were actually quelled before causing any damage, but two attempted infiltrations are noteworthy. First, Amazon Web Services allegedly stopped the largest DDoS attack ever recorded. The company claimed it was a 2.3 terabyte attack that, according to SC Magazine, was 44% larger than any network volumetric event previously detected on AWS. And then Akamai also recorded an attack on a European bank that was 809 million packets per second. DDoS attacks are usually recorded in bits per second, which makes this one sort of stand out. So, Jeff, what do you make of the rise in DDoS and the seemingly ineffectiveness of the attacks?
Again, I kind of see that there are some of these things that are there's a greater target that hasn't necessarily been identified yet as a result, but they've got to be probing for vulnerabilities. My son is into a show called White Collars. During the pandemic, we've got to go through and watch all the shows that I've watched already, and then with my oldest son, and now with my younger son. But it's interesting when Neil, the main character, I always talk about Neil, right? Neil Bridges. When Neil Caffrey is figuring out how to do an attack on a bank, he'll do a test attack and see how long it takes for people to show up. What is the response? How do you respond? And I think some of that might be where some of these are targeting, is just to understand the process and the network and the ability for some of these to respond. Attacking Amazon that's a giant thing to be successful with. If you would have been successful, that would have been like, all right, major street cred for you. But the bottom line, it's super difficult because they're so huge. A DDoS attack at that magnitude is something really, really hard.
To take apart a couple of those, I think there is an aspect of using DDoS as a cover for another activity. In a case like this, they weren't attacking Amazon. Most likely, they were attacking some piece of infrastructure that was being hosted on Amazon, and it testing, to your point, Amazon's ability to be able to block or respond to that DDoS attack. Same with Akamai, right? Akamai just acts as a front end, just like Cloudflare or anybody else. And so they were probably attacking some website that was behind, that front end, to see what that response was. But there's a massive business in DDoSes just from I hate this entity, knock them offline. I hate to go back to my Minecraft example, right? But that's really like, there's a massive underground, marketplace. Like if anybody listening wanted to actually do some really, really awesome, side gigs in this pandemic, like go start you a DDoS service on Minecraft servers and just start knocking people's Minecraft servers offline. Cause I mean, we joke about it, but there actually is big business in saying, I want that website to go down for a certain amount of time. Think about if you're eBay. If you can knock eBay offline for an hour, how much money did eBay lose, right? eBay is kind of a big example, but there's rival e-commerce sites that are out there. People when the Mirai botnet first came up, right, they used Brian Krebs's website as a test website just to prove somebody high profile that they could take it offline for that kind of that clout, that street cred to do. And so you have to gauge DDoS attacks the same way that you gauge malware attacks or phishing attacks or state sponsored attacks. Is that a TTP of a threat actor that you as an entity or an organization need to worry about? When I was working for the financial organization, DDoSes very much were something we had to worry about. However, when I go to, say, something like a healthcare organization or an energy sector organization, where you may just have like an informational website where you don't really have much on there, a DDoS attack may not necessarily be, inside your wheelhouse. I think the innovation comes here. What we see with DDoS attacks that make them awesome to understand are the tactics that they're using to generate this load of traffic on the internet. So like when DNS amplification attacks first came out, nobody even thought about, dear God, I never thought that you could use a DNS packet, make it that big and use that as a way to knock a system offline. Same with Mirai botnet. I don't think anybody really thought about the dangers of IoT at the time. And so what's really interesting is looking at how these people are using the same skills that an exploit developer uses to find a 0-day in Windows or OS X or iOS or something like that, using that same mentality to try to find ways to create large volumes of traffic without necessarily needing the entire internet to do it.
Well, I think later in the article it talks about the preparedness. You have to, as an organization, make sure that you're thinking through. All right, if we are attacked, what is our first, second, third plan of action? Who owns that, and when and how do we bring in?
But
appropriate help?
I challenge organizations that you as an entity, short of having tight relationships with an Akamai or a Cloudflare or an AWS or somewhere like that, you're going to be challenged to be able to do that. I mean, you can try to work with your upstream ISP provider, like a Verizon or an AT&T or something like that, to see if they've got, in-stream protections. But you have to remember, you're getting, some unknown volume of traffic from some unknown parts of the internet that, you have no idea whether they look legitimate or don't look legitimate. And so that makes it incredibly hard to identify kind of leading indicators of this attack coming at you. That's why Akamai and Cloudflare and Amazon are really starting to get really into this business, is because they're seeing so much traffic that they can use my favorite terms in the whole wide world, AI and ML, right, to try to figure out what an attack like that looks like so they can get ahead of it.
Well, and then you've got the network providers that can either try to deal with it themselves, or they can just pass that traffic on to the end user. Yeah, I mean, it seems a little willy-nilly of, hopefully the network provider is going to cover me. But unless you have that pre-discussed with them and probably a contract to take care of that, they're not going to.
So I'm going to use a Jurassic Park reference for the second time in 3 episodes that we've been doing this. But Jeff, if the... You did,
I think I used it in the first one too. So we're 3 for 3.
The Raptors are testing the fences, like you're kind of insinuating, Jeff. What's the next step for DDoS attacks? I mean, do you think that these were successful, even though they were mitigated? Do you think that the next step is a large scale attack that will be successful?
Well, I think this is part of the tabletop exercise that have to happen, and some red teaming to start putting the test to your own environment. Just like we talk about having a pen test done, right? That's just standard operating procedure now to see where on the scale of good and bad you are from being able to protect against some of these things. And I think some of the testing of the fences has to include DDoS attacks.
That is, while not inaccurate, technically hard to do, right? There's, you can't have a red team that's going to be like, you know what, today I'm going to simulate a DNS amplification attack and simulate that on our own environment.
No, but I mean, it's not necessarily the same as a red team attack, but you can put yourself through some DDoS testing. And there's tons of simulations out there.
I did.
You just talked about
what you're referring to. But I think your point about tabletop exercises is valid. I think, but again, I think this is one of those times where I probably have a little bit more conservative approach. Is you rarely can do anything about a DDoS attack, right? You as a victim don't have a lot of recourse, and so you're either reliant on your upstream network providers, you're either reliant on a cloud front, like Akamai or somebody else to help you, or you're just riding out the storm until it's over. And so, like, if you're looking on where to put resources and where to put time, really ask yourself, is that a threat actor or a threat vector, that you're concerned about? Because if it's not something you're concerned about, then I think if you're looking to prioritize your work streams, that's probably pretty low on the list.
So before we move on to our next topic, I do feel like I'm legally obligated to say that eLearnSecurity does not advocate for getting a part-time job during the pandemic DDoSing Minecraft accounts. Please do not do that, and please do not think that we told you that.
Matt, were you just getting texts from your lawyer?
My views are my own and do not reflect those of the people around me.
I'm working as my own lawyer in this instance, which full represents a full. I was
going to say, you stayed at a Holiday Express last night. I'm good.
So to move on to our next topic, we've mentioned REvil in the podcast already, but REvil hackers infiltrated Telecom Argentina, which is one of the country's largest internet service providers. This happened on the weekend of July 18th, and this was basically using their REvil ransomware attack to take over the company's network. They're now asking for $7.5 million in ransom to be delivered through Monero cryptocurrency to unlock the encrypted files. Now, the attack did not affect any internet services. However, the hijackers were able to get into internal domain admins and spread their infection to about 18,000 workstations. Like a few other hack organizations, and this is something we've talked about before, REvil is known to release sensitive information if a company is unable or unwilling to pay the ransom. So, Neil, what can you tell us about the attack and its aftermath as it's ongoing right now?
Oops, is the short answer on the attack? That's insightful.
That's insightful. Neil.
Everybody all across the interwebs is going, wow. Right.
Exactly.
I mean, they targeted Pulse and Citrix. Sorry, we just got done talking about an attacker having to get it right once. Right. This is Pulse vulnerability and Citrix VPN and gateway vulnerabilities, which are at least, I think Pulse is 4 months old now. I think that vulnerability is something like 4 or 5 months old. Citrix vulnerability is a couple months old too. So, this is an example where who knows what Argentina Telecom was doing right. Maybe they did everything right, except that we get back to this maturity conversation, right? The bear just happened to be faster than they were when it came to their vulnerability management program. And that's where it caught up with them. They probably had all the right policies. Maybe they had all the right incident response team. Who knows? Maybe they responded to this thing, in an amazing fashion. Who knows? But their vulnerability management program just wasn't faster than the bear. And so I think that's the huge aha moment with this one is, if we're going to keep going on the really crazy analogies that we've been using all stream, right? That's what we're looking at. I think the second thing, the thing that I think is very, very interesting is the demand for Monero. And in some topics that we've talked about before, and just in terms of Bitcoin and how hard it is how easy it is for the FBI, for the IRS even. Matt, hope you don't mind me doing this, but like on the stream that I did a couple of days ago, I talked about just like the Bitcoin analysis that some of these organizations were doing to try to track down like the Twitter hackers and the Bitcoin addresses they were using for the Twitter hackers. These guys have chosen specifically to go to Monero, which is a very, very, very known and actually admittedly by the FBI, one of the hardest cryptocurrencies to actually de-anonymize and find out who owns that crypto. I think that's an aha moment where it's like, okay, so now some of these ransomware, cartels like REvil and potentially Maze in the future, somebody else is going to start moving to some of these more secure cryptocurrencies like Monero, for their activity, because they're feeling some pressure from law enforcement or other organizations like Coinbase or Coin Analysis that are starting to do a lot of deeper analytics on Bitcoins.
Well, what I found interesting about this is they actually think that the attackers already owned Monero, because this would literally move the stock price of Monero, this one attack. If they actually paid 7.5 mil, they'd have to buy it when the stock price would literally
this is an influx of hard cash into the Monero stock price, if you will. Yep. This is an instant capitalization of the currency.
It's almost the underground funding, like round of funding, basically.
This is the Fed printing money right here. They just go ransomware somebody and make a company put $7.5 million into Monero.
Exactly. Hey, my Monero account just went up 48%.
No, but I think those are the two big ones that really stand out to me on this one. Other than the fact that again, it's the bear example,
and it should also be.
We're gonna have 10 shows from now. We're just gonna start mentioning the bear, and a new listener is gonna be like, I have no idea what they're talking about.
They're gonna think they're talking about you.
Oh, nice. You said you were going to be feisty.
And
I was waiting for this.
Neil, you said that Argentina, the Telecom Argentina could have been doing everything right, and maybe have a few issues with patching here and there. But the other thing is that it again is an employee opening a malicious email. It's that human factor being. I don't want to say the weakest link, because it's hard for me to say humans are a weak link, but it is something that when you have cybersecurity programs that are sophisticated, but you are not testing your employees, that you are not you're not doing training on the cybersecurity and for your employees, then this is the threat that you face.
But without again, I hate to turn cynical, Neil, on you, right? But and again, I believe very, very much in security awareness programs. But again, if you've got a 45,000, 65,000, 110,000 employee company, it only takes one employee. And the probability that an enterprise of that size at 100% of the time, every hour of every day, can have every employee be perfectly diligent in every email that they receive is statistically impossible.
Sure. And I'm not arguing that, but again, it goes back to that camper and the bear conversation of, it's still essential to be testing your employees. It's still essential to be doing cybersecurity awareness, because, water finds the easiest path. And
That's right.
if you're making it a little bit more difficult, even if it's not going to work 100% of the time, you're still making it a little bit more difficult, and you're allowing that water to find a new path.
Yep. I think this one, the water found the vulnerabilities, faults and Citrix.
So for our last topic, there's some interesting news in the nation state front. First, it appears that a video is accidentally uploaded onto the open web.
See, this is where I say oops.
And the reason I say accidentally, and the reason that Jeff says oops, is because it seems to have been a video that was uploaded by Iranian hackers, that is showing, essentially recording an Iranian hacking operation. And this showed up on the open web and was picked up very quickly. That is more of the Benny Hill side of the nation state.
So doesn't inside, an attacking organization have insider threats?
I mean, we could say, right. Well,
was it intentional?
This is incredible rabbit hole here, right? Because, who's to say, like, without sounding too cynical on this, right? Russia, China, and Iran all publicly admit that they allow their civilians to conduct offensive operations, and then sometimes they do it for the government on the side. This feels more like an OPSEC fail than an insider threat problem. Somebody was like, I've got to train somebody how to do an offensive operation, and so they put it up on a clear.
This is just easier for me to do it this
classified system. This is an OPSEC fail.
So, and it does seem
this is shadow IT gone amok in a positive way. It's a double negative.
NSA side, right? The CIA hack, right? I mean, cases in point where that's an organization where they were doing clandestine activities and failed even basic security procedures.
And while I'll say that this seems to be more on the Mr. Bean side of things, there is a bigger threat, which is essentially that. So the U.S., UK, and Canadian authorities announced earlier this week that Russia's cybersecurity unit is attacking organizations involved in COVID-19 vaccine development. Now, this is government. This is government operations. This is private industry. This is pharmaceutical companies, clinical research companies. Russia seems to be going after organizations that may have insight into a vaccine in order to steal IP. Now, there's a tendency to look at both Iran and Russia as national security threats, and there's no doubt that they are. But what I'm interested in and what I'm wondering about is how, actions in Russia and Iran affect businesses as well. I mean, like I said, the companies that Russia are targeting are mostly private industry.
Well, but the difference is, I think if I recall correctly, and I think the Washington Post article that I sent to you along with this actually comes out and says that we as a nation have said that, we don't consider this as an act of war, right? That this is happening. And I think that that's almost as awkward of a conversation, right? Is like, we know that we're getting our secrets stolen, but we're not going to call it an act of war by another nation state. And so, you as a private business, I think if you're Pfizer or Abbott or AbbVie or anybody else like that, you're looking at this going, well, I guess I'm out here on my own trying to defend myself from Russian FSB, but at the same time, the National Security Agency and the U.S. government won't share any of the TTPs or secrets or signatures with me that they have on the FSB because they're worried about, burning intelligence. So now, if you're AbbVie, how do you weigh that threat, in your risk management conversation and in your budget conversations with the board?
Yeah, one of the interesting things that I think about this is, you're right, the U.S. is not going to claim that this is an act of war, but when you talk about cybersecurity insurance, there's certainly the possibility that insurance providers are talking about this as an act of terror.
You went
so, while yes, not an act of war, could it be seen in the eyes of cybersecurity insurance as an act of terror?
until anybody and I'm not going to call it a specific cyber insurance company, but until somebody from the cyber insurance industry is sitting with the U.S. Congress when they make a declaration of an act of war or an act of terror, I don't think any insurance organization should be deciding on insurance policies based on their own self-proclaimed definition of those two things.
And I want to make sure to bring up why I bring this up. I'm not doing this to criticize cybersecurity insurance, and it's certainly an option that a lot of companies are interested in right now. But what I'm saying is that cyber insurance doesn't take the place of a cybersecurity team. If Abbott or AbbVie are infiltrated and IP is stolen from them, you're not guaranteed to collect any money from insurance because nation state actors are involved.
I see Jeff's like eyeballing this one. He's shaking his head. Yeah, I know he wants to jump in on this. We're beating him.
Well, this is a board level conversation where they say, "Hey, do we have cyber insurance?" And they think they're covered, right? This is people that are making decisions about what our coverage is, what our security stance is, and not to say anything negative about them, because their job is really hard to focus on running the business, and then, oh, by the way, making sure that that they are covered from some of these really intricate facets of their business that, quite frankly, you say, is it nation state? Is it act of terror? Are we covered for either one of those? How are those determined? There's so many different things that go into cyber coverage, and should you or should you not be covered? I'm just wondering, when someone comes out with a blanket cyber policy and says it's going to cost you X number of dollars, 5 times more than a normal premium, but I got you covered. Right? You just wonder if that's the next step of this, because it seems like with this, you see in the news, there aren't any large payouts of cyber insurance that hit the news. There's a lot of lawsuits that hit the news.
I don't think, but if I had to guess, and I'm not going to put my experience in cyber insurance against Matt's, who's been in that business and done cyber insurance, right? But I've sat with Lloyd's and I've sat with Aon before, right? And I actually wrote about this in LinkedIn a couple years back, right? Is I think that the folks who benefit the most out of cyber insurance are the companies that can't afford whenever there is a cyber attack. And even if we're not talking about the theft of IP, let's think about like business email compromise. I've been part of incidents, right, where business email compromise has been anywhere from a couple $100,000 to a couple $1 million. There's organizations that, that money still has to be recovered somewhere else. And if you're a $50 billion organization or a $60 billion organization, you can probably eat $100,000 or $200,000. That's pocket change. But if you're like a mid cap, or if you're under, maybe $500 million, that might actually start to hurt a little bit more from a revenue perspective, and really start to affect,
That's the difference between you going public and not going public.
So what, in my conversation with Lloyd's and Aon, they were very open. They were saying those are the types of folks who actually benefit the most out of cyber insurance, because a company, a Fortune 100 like Microsoft or Abbott or AbbVie or Astellas or anybody else, they're going to eat costs like that, and they're probably even going to eat something in the $1 million range. So that's where I think that's why we are not seeing those, is because none of those small companies whose probably reputation will get hit harder from having that type of compromise, that's why we're not seeing those in the news, is because we don't see those insurance payouts.
Yeah, one of the other things to think about is, especially if we're talking about this Russia coronavirus topic, AbbVie, these pharmaceutical companies, they have indemnified themselves in a lot of ways with the level of insurance that they have against lawsuits from cybersecurity incidents. But, the clinical trial companies aren't the size of the pharmaceutical companies. They're often between 500 and 1,200 employees, and they are tasked with securing incredibly sensitive intellectual property, often on a shoestring, cybersecurity budget.
And PII.
And so there are not only HIPAA and regulatory issues that you have to deal with, but there's also one of these could kill your reputation with the big pharmaceutical companies that you rely on for, for revenue. So even if you were able to recoup through insurance any sort of loss financially from that specific attack, you're now kind of branded almost. You have that scarlet letter around you that you lost sensitive intellectual property.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that is our show today. So, gentlemen, again, thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much for joining me. And we will see you next week.